The story begins in the tense, high-stakes environment of a high school locker room during halftime. A fiery football coach named Jim White watches his team get utterly humiliated on the field, setting a record for the most points ever scored against their school. Tempers flare when Jim notices the team captain laughing off the devastating loss, completely indifferent to the failure. Consumed by fury at their lack of discipline, Jim loses his temper completely, creating an explosive confrontation that alters the course of his career forever. This volatile outburst costs him his job, leaving his family's future hanging by a thread. Desperate for a fresh start and running out of options, Jim is forced to accept a teaching position in a completely different world, a small, struggling agricultural town called McFarland, California. As Jim drives his family into the town under the blazing sun, the atmosphere is heavy with dread. His daughters look out the window in absolute shock, asking if they have somehow crossed the border into Mexico. The neighborhood is worn down, dusty, and entirely foreign to anything they have ever known. Seeking comfort, the family stops at a local diner, only to experience immediate culture shock. There are no burgers on the menu, only traditional Mexican dishes they can barely pronounce. The tension escalates dramatically when they step outside into the darkness. A fleet of modified lowrider cars suddenly surrounds the area, engines revving as crowds gather in the shadows. Terrified by what looks like a dangerous street gang, Jim panics, hurriedly pushing his family into the car. He declares that they cannot stay in this town for even a single week, desperate to flee to a safer city, even if it means financial ruin. However, his wife gently reminds him of their brutal reality. They are completely broke, living on a meager teacher's salary, and McFarland is the only place that would take him. They have absolutely no choice but to survive. Monday morning arrives, and Jim steps into McFarland High School, feeling like a complete outsider. He meets the cynical principal Camillo, who openly addresses Jim's troubled past. Jim had been fired in his previous school for verbal abuse and clashing with authority. The principal delivers a chilling warning, stating that McFarland is Jim's absolute last chance, and one more mistake will ruin him permanently. Jim is assigned as a PE teacher, a life science instructor, and the assistant football coach alongside the arrogant head coach Jenks. Right from the first practice, Jim notices something extraordinary about the local kids. Despite having no proper gear and leaving class early to help their families harvest crops in the brutal heat, their endurance is unparalleled. However, during his very first Friday night game, Jim's protective instincts kick in when a player suffers a severe head injury. Coach Jenks insists on sending the dazed boy back into the game, prompting Jim to fiercely intervene and pull the player off the field. This sudden act of defiance seals his fate, sparking a massive administrative war that threatens to destroy Jim's final lifeline before his new life can even begin. The fallout from the football field is immediate and merciless. Head coach Jenks refuses to work with Jim, forcing Principal Camillo to strip him of his coaching duties. Though he isn't entirely fired from the school, Jim is left humiliated, his paycheck is compromised, and he is stuck teaching basic physical education to students who look right through him. But during these mundane PE classes, Jim begins to notice a striking anomaly. While running laps on the track, a handful of boys aren't just fast, they are moving at a terrifying, relentless pace without even breaking a sweat. Later that evening, Jim witnesses something that changes everything. While driving home, he spots one of his students, Thomas Valles, running down the side of the road. Jim checks his speedometer and his jaw drops. The boy is maintaining a blistering speed of nearly 12 miles an hour, completely on foot, outrunning the traffic. Jim tries to offer him a ride, but Thomas aggressively refuses, disappearing into the twilight. Jim realizes these kids possess a rare, untapped superpower born from years of grueling labor. Every single day, before the sun even rises, they are out in the agricultural fields picking crops, working hours of backbreaking labor before running miles just to get to school on time. An ambitious, desperate idea sparks in Jim's mind. He approaches the principal with a wild proposal. He wants to form a cross-country running team. The principal is openly skeptical, laughing it off as a wealthy, elite private school sport for kids who breathe different air. But Jim pushes hard, leveraging a state funding loophole to get the program approved. Now, he just needs 7 runners. Jim manages to recruit a ragtag group, including the unstoppable but deeply troubled Thomas Valles, and even convinces a sweet, overweight kid named Danny Diaz to join just to fill the roster. With minimal preparation and wearing basic sneakers, Jim takes his new team to their very first official cross-country meet in Palo Alto. The contrast is brutal. The McFarland boys find themselves surrounded by wealthy, privileged schools with state-of-the-art gear and specialized trainers. The opposing runners openly mock them, joking that the McFarland kids only know how to run if a cop is chasing them. The race begins, and the McFarland boys push themselves to the absolute limit, but disasters strike at the final stretch. Unaware of how to pace themselves on steep terrain, the boys hit a massive, grueling hill that drains their strength completely. They cross the finish line entirely broken, finishing dead last out of the entire roster. The crushing defeat leaves the boys completely demoralized, deeply embarrassed, and on the verge of quitting the team forever, realizing just how massive the divide is between their world and the rest of society. The stinging humiliation in Palo Alto forces Jim to change his entire strategy. He realizes that if his runners are going to survive against elite schools, they need to conquer the one thing that broke them: hills. But McFarland is completely flat. Looking around the agricultural landscape, Jim finds his solution in the massive, towering mountains of almond hulls piled high behind the processing plants. He drags the boys to these unstable, shifting peaks of agricultural waste, forcing them to sprint up and down in the blazing heat. The training is pure torture, the whole shift under their feet, draining their energy and pushing their lungs to the bursting point. Tempers flare as the boys reach their breaking point. Thomas Valles explodes in anger, confronting Jim directly. He yells that Jim doesn't understand anything because he isn't a picker, they are always going to be pickers, trapped in a relentless cycle of backbreaking labor, and no amount of running will ever change their reality. Thomas walks off, quitting the team on the spot. Distracted by the collapsing team dynamics, Jim commits a devastating personal mistake. He completely forgets his daughter Julie's 15th birthday, arriving home late without her cake. His wife is furious, reminding him that families in this town fiercely protect their children's milestones, yet he is completely failing his own family. Haunted by guilt, Jim drives out into the midnight darkness, only to discover a tragedy in motion. He finds Thomas Valles sitting dangerously on the edge of a highway overpass bridge, bruised and weeping after trying to stop his overwhelmed father from a domestic outburst. Thomas is ready to jump, feeling utterly trapped by the bleakness of his future. Jim steps up, talking him down from the ledge with raw honesty, convincing him that running is the only escape he has left. With Thomas back on the roster, the team travels to a dual meet against the heavily favored Clovis High School. Applying their grueling Almond Hall Hill training, the McFarland boys shock the racing community. They run with calculated fury, conquering the terrain and securing a stunning, 1-point upset victory over Clovis. The celebration is cut short the very next Monday when the Diaz brothers, including Danny, their emotional anchor, suddenly vanish from practice. Jim tracks them down to the fields, only to be confronted by their strict father, who coldly informs Jim that sports are an unessential luxury. The boys must work the fields to put food on the table, effectively crippling the team just as they tasted their first victory. Determined not to let the team fall apart, Jim makes a radical move to earn the respect of the Diaz family. On a grueling Saturday morning, he shows up at dawn in the burning agricultural fields, bending his back alongside the boys to pick crops. Within just a few hours, the intense physical labor leaves Jim completely broken, his hands blistered and his back in agonizing pain. Experiencing the brutal reality these kids endure every single day shifts Jim's entire perspective. Seeing his dedication, the Diaz father respects the sacrifice and agrees to a compromise. The boys can stay on the team, provided they still meet their strict daily agricultural quotas. Jim restructures everything, adjusting practice times to late nights and early mornings so the boys can fulfill their duties both in the fields and on the track. To support the team, the vibrant McFarland community rallies together, throwing a massive car wash and tamale fundraiser to buy the boys proper running shoes and uniforms. The powerful bond between the coach, the runners, and the town begins to yield spectacular results. The McFarland Cougars become an absolute force, racking up consecutive, stunning victories over powerhouse schools like Yosemite and Morro Bay. They are no longer the invisible, forgotten kids from the fields, they are becoming local legends, caught in a whirlwind of momentum that puts them on the direct path to qualifying for the inaugural California State Championship. Jim uses this momentum to ignite a bigger dream within the boys, urging them to look beyond the fields and start aiming for college degrees. However, this newfound success attracts outside attention. An elite school from Palo Alto takes notice of Jim's miraculous coaching abilities and secretly approaches him with a lucrative, highly prestigious job offer that could grant his family the wealthy, safe lifestyle they have always wanted. Before Jim can even process the offer, the team heads to the high-stakes regional qualifiers. Facing terrifyingly steep mountain terrain, Jim rallies the boys, telling them that while their privileged opponents might have better gear, nobody on earth can endure pain like a McFarland picker. The race is a brutal, exhausting battle, but the boys push through the agony, miraculously placing in the top 4 and officially qualifying for the state championship. To celebrate, Jim takes the boys to the ocean, breathtaking place most of them have never seen in their entire lives. But just as the team reaches the absolute pinnacle of joy and unity, a devastating shadow falls over them. Back in McFarland, as the community celebrates, Jim tries to give his daughter the perfect cultural tradition she deserves, setting off a sequence of events that leaves their lives hanging in the balance. With the momentum of their state qualification, Jim throws his heart into organizing a beautiful, traditional quinceañera for his daughter Julie, determined to make up for his past mistakes. The entire McFarland community steps in to help, transforming a local garage into a vibrant dance floor filled with music, laughter, and deep mutual respect. The cultural celebration beautifully seals the bond between the White family and the town. As the night winds down, the local lowrider car club safely treats Julie to a slow, proud parade around the neighborhood. But in an instant, the joy turns to pure horror. A rival gang suddenly arrives at a nearby parking lot, pulling out weapons in a flash of violence. Panic erupts, and during the chaotic scuffle, a few members of Jim's running team bravely throw themselves in front of Julie, pushing her to safety just as a full-blown bloodbath ensues. Julie escapes without serious physical harm, but the neighborhood is left stained with blood and flashing police lights. Jim arrives at the scene completely traumatized and consumed by panic. He lashes out at the local boys, shouting that he trusted them to keep his daughter safe. The terrifying incident shatters Jim's sense of security, convincing him that McFarland is simply too dangerous for his family to stay in. The very next morning, Jim quietly sneaks away to Palo Alto to interview for the prestigious, high-paying coaching job. The contrast is night and day, a state-of-the-art facility, wealth, and absolute safety. They offer him the full-time position on the spot. However, word of his secret meeting spreads instantly. When Jim returns to McFarland, Thomas Valles confronts him in the parking lot, his eyes filled with betrayal. Thomas coldly asks if Jim was even going to say goodbye, or if he was just going to abandon them for the country club kids after the state meet. Thomas bitterly notes that nobody stays in McFarland unless they absolutely have to, because there is nothing American dream about their town. Jim faces a heavy, gut-wrenching decision at home. He tells his wife that Palo Alto offers everything they ever wanted, financial security and a safe neighborhood. But his wife drops a powerful truth. She points out that when danger struck, the McFarland boys didn't run away. They risked their own lives to protect Julie like she was their own family. She looks Jim in the eyes and tells him that nowhere they have ever lived has felt this much like home. Caught between the allure of wealth and the deep love of a community that has fully embraced them, Jim drives the team to the historic state championship, his heart torn in two as the ultimate race of their lives finally arrives. The atmosphere at the inaugural California State Cross Country Championship is absolutely electric, charged with immense pressure. The McFarland boys stand on the starting line, surrounded by the absolute best, most heavily funded teams in the entire state. Sensing their intimidation, Jim gathers the boys in a tight huddle. He looks into their eyes and delivers a soul-stirring speech, telling them that while their privileged opponents have spent their lives training on pristine tracks, they have never endured the grueling hardship of the agricultural fields. He calls them superhuman, reminding them that their unmatched strength, heart, and the sacrifices of their hardworking parents have earned them the right to be here. With their spirits ignited, Thomas Valles calls the final huddle, and the pistol fires. The race starts at a brutal, chaotic pace. In a shocking twist, Jose Cardenas lets his nerves get the better of him and sprints out way too fast, completely breaking his pacing strategy. Jim watches in horror from the sidelines, knowing Jose is running out of gas early and will pay a painful price. The rest of the team realizes they have to make up for the lost points. Thomas Valles runs with calculated fury, leading the pack, while Victor and Damasio push their bodies past the absolute limit to stay within striking distance of the front runners. As they hit the final, agonizing stretch, the scores are neck and neck, and everything hinges on the fifth and final scoring runner. Suddenly, a massive roar erupts from the crowd. Emerging from the dust isn't a runner from a wealthy academy, it is Danny Diaz. The boy who started as an overweight anchor finishes with a spectacular, jaw-dropping sprint, overtaking 3 runners at the finish line. After an agonizing delay as officials calculate the incredibly close times, the announcer finally declares the winner. Against all mathematical odds, the McFarland High School Cougars are crowned the first ever California state champions. The celebration is pure euphoria. In the midst of the triumph, Jim makes his final, defining choice. He officially turns down the wealthy Palo Alto offer, choosing to stay in McFarland permanently, realizing that his family has found a community worth more than gold. The story closes on a deeply emotional note back in the town courtyard. As Jim sits peacefully with his family and team, a McFarland truck finally pulls down the old, oppressive corporate banner that had blocked the neighborhood view for decades. For the very first time, the horizon is completely clear, bathed in beautiful sunlight. Looking out at the open sky, the boys realize they are no longer just invisible pickers, they are champions who have rewritten their own destiny.